is an academic who has published several academic papers regarding Canadian charities and money that has been flowing to Israel, specifically related to the settlements and military and such, and continues to do research in that regard. I turn it over to Miles to speak, but just before I do that, I remind any of the media that may have questions to please contact me through the chat so that we can be ready to unmute you for questions following Miles. So thanks so much, Miles, for joining us, and over to you.
Thanks, Karen, and thanks to the insights from all the other panelists as well. Before I get started, I do want to say that I'm in no way equating the trauma that the JNF of Canada causes within Canada to the horrific erasure and displacement of Indigenous Palestinian people in Palestine. But I will lead with this. From a personal standpoint, I have experienced JNF Canada's processes of indoctrination starting at a very young age. And so what the JNF does is very publicly tells you that there's only one good way to be a Jew. And what it does is it attempts to reroute sacred principles, specifically tzedakah, which is gift giving, helping your fellow human being regardless of religious affiliation. And from a very young age, if you attend Hebrew school, either after-school programs or day schools in Canada, you're given a little blue plastic or metal box with which you're expected to fill with change, take home, bring it back to school, and your classroom will have little competitions to see who can raise the most money and who can plant the most trees in Israel. You're not given any more information in that regard but that. And so you begin to very quickly equate being a good Jewish person, being a good Jewish child, with the notion of rerouting your own desires to belong, to do good in this world, to give, etc., to provide to others who may be less fortunate than yourselves. You begin to equate that with giving to Israel, this sort of place in the sky utopia to which you will always have affiliation and belonging should things ever go wrong. And if your parents were subjected to this type of indoctrination as well, as we were talking about the family table last night, it's simply perpetuated. And so that is the JNF Canada. And that's what it does in Canada as well. And that's how it raises money and convinces people that to be a Zionist is to be a Jew, and to be at least to even question the notion of the state of Israel is to be somehow anti-Semitic, or to, if you're a Jew, to hate yourself. So you have to firstly get out from under that. That being said, that's not really the point that I wanted to make here today. We're looking at a revocation here, right? And it's a very interesting thing. So what we have to do here is basically put on a bit of an investigation hat, because the CRA is bound by privacy while the JNF Canada is not. So the JNF Canada, in the ensuing time between the federal appeal that it's able to mount here against this revocation, which apparently is happening, is going to start putting out all kinds of, I'm going to call it propaganda. First and foremost, this morning, or perhaps late last night, it raised the specter, of course, of anti-Semitism, and it also said that the reality of why it's going to get revoked is that the CRA has decided that its original charitable purpose of 60 years ago or so, when it was registered as a charity in Canada in 1967, is no longer considered charitable. That purpose, quote, was funds for the employment of indigent laborers on various work projects for which they receive daily stipends. I've been through a number of revocation packages from the CRA, and I'll tell you in no uncertain terms that the CRA has never revoked a charitable status license in Canada over questions of not meeting your self-stated charitable purpose. So I'm going to go ahead and call that one BS. Why then would the JNF of Canada, why now, and why is its charitable status being revoked? Beyond what JNF Canada is going to want you to believe, and beyond what the CRA can't actually tell you for the moment. The panelists here have touched upon most likely the infractions are related to a measure of undirected or control over its Israeli agents in Israel. Specifically, when we look at JNF Canada's overseas activities forms over the last 6 years, you see that its main recipient is an Israeli agent known as Keren Kayemet LeIsrael, which is KKL, let's call it that abbreviation. And KKL JNF is the Israeli entity legally that owns this vast amount of land within Israel. Now, Keren Kayemet, or KKL, is very much involved within purchasing land, expropriated under violence and horrific conditions, specifically within the West Bank, which is counter to Canadian public policy, and charities are not to act counter to Canadian public policy, and that's law in this country. In 2018, JNF provided KKL with $6.6 million, 2019, 9.4. There's a steep drop-off in 2020, I would say probably related to pressure from campaigns, grassroots campaigns here in Canada, but still 1.2 million flows to KKL, 2021 1.8, 2022 3.9, for a grand total over the past 2018 to 2022 of just shy of $23 million going to KKL. Now, the JNF, let's call it through activist pressure, has experienced pushback against its association formally with the KKL. So much so that in March of 2021, the JNF took the step of actually publicly distancing itself from the KKL in a letter to its donors and a letter to its members. It says it removes the KKL logo from its website. It actually removes the KKL acronym from its name, and it signs an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with the KKL, in which it claims autonomy over its funds, saying that all these funds, this 23, just shy $1 million, is not going towards Palestinian expropriation, but other things. And we're expected here to take their word for it. If I were to put on my Sherlock Holmes hat here, I would say that's probably the issue, given that KKL is repeatedly the JNF of Canada's most prolific recipient of donations. I'd say there's a lack of control, there's a lack of direction here, and obviously the CRA, or I would say most obviously the CRA, which has been very interested in JNF Canada. It has been the subject of numerous audits, again, which as the public we are not privy to, but it has audited the JNF repeatedly. And so if I were, again, to put on my hat and pipe here, I would say that there's something within this relationship specifically that doesn't pass muster. In the past, KKL has gone very far in towards funding projects on land owned by the IDF, on purchasing land expropriated within the West Bank specifically. And so who's to say it does this through its own organization and also through private contractors? Himanuta Limited of the West Bank is a prolific purchaser and expropriator of Palestinian lands. And so my take on this, why here, why now, is that there's something there within that relationship that does not pass the CRA standard. It's a good thing to see this beginning to be enforced finally. As Karen and others have pointed out, there are numerous complaints to the CRA over a variety of charities. The JNF is a key piece of this. It's certainly not the only piece. But as we know also, from those of us who have been involved or who leaf through these types of charitable documents, including, how the CRA proceeds through an audit, it's a long and slow process. And so if I were again to put on my hat, this is related to something that's probably happened at least 2 years ago, because this is what the time sort of takes for an audit to lead to a revocation. And it's been a long time in the works. I would also say do not listen or do not necessarily take at face value what the JNF is saying in terms of why this revocation is now on the table. That is one key takeaway as well. I can virtually guarantee you, after having looked through, I would say, at least a dozen revocation due to failed audit packages, that there is no way possible that the CRA is going to revoke the JNF Canada, an organization with significant political clout within the Canadian sphere, over some kind of misunderstanding over a self-stated charitable purpose. There's way more going on here than we know. And unfortunately, we're going to have to wait for that federal appeal to come out to get access to some of those documents. So at best, what we can do here is keep the pressure on, put on our very, put some cynical lenses on our glasses when we read press releases from the JNF, because it will be a one-sided experience for those of us involved in this. Mainstream media in Canada does a fairly abhorrent job of covering this issue objectively, if at all. It's generally just crickets in the mist. There's simply nothing. And the bought and paid for media, such as the National Post this morning, etc., is going to cover this as though the JNF is simply being abused by veins of anti-Semitism that are running rampant within the CRA. Don't trust that line, and I would say wait for the outcome. Thanks very much, and I'll be pleased to answer any questions.
Thanks so much.